Hey guys, tonight we tumble into a place where the air stings your face before you even get your boots off, where the endless steppe shivers beneath a velvet black sky, and the wind is always plotting some minor mischief with your eyebrows. You're standing just outside a low round felt tent, what you now know is called a yurt, but right now all you care about is that it's the only thing standing between you and the bite of a Mongolian winter night. The grass crunches underfoot like frosted cereal. Horses nicker somewhere out in the dark, their breath turning instantly to clouds. The moon, huge and somehow both comforting and deeply judgmental, hangs above you like it's waiting to see if you'll make it till morning. You take a breath, the air burns your nose. You probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Where in the world are you tuning in from tonight, and what time is it on your clock? Drop it in the comments so we can see just how many cozy corners our little community covers. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You squint against the wind, which is already picking up speed. If it gets any stronger, it'll start composing its own sad little flute solo with the seams of your coat. The steppe isn't empty at night, it's alive with the huffs and grunts of animals, the shrill bark of a distant fox, and the shuffling sounds of your fellow Mongols setting up for the long, punishing darkness. There's a rhythm to it all, even if it mostly involves not freezing your toes off. Someone's chipping at a frozen water bucket, and you hear a grumble about whether it's too cold for tea, or not cold enough to bother with boiling it. You duck into the yurt, the felt flap smacking you lightly in the face, a little reminder that no matter how tough you think you are, the weather's always tougher. Inside it's a patchwork of warmth and chaos, sleeping furs piled up like an afterthought, an iron stove glowing with a soft orange heat, children giggling as they peel off layer after layer, and a faint smell of smoke and something vaguely resembling last week's mutton stew. The air inside isn't exactly fresh, but you'll take sheep-scented heat over frozen lungs any night. Outside, the world is all black and silver, but inside, the yurt pulses with life and a strange sense of stubbornness. Nobody here pretends the night is easy. Not the old grandmother who hums to herself as she wraps her feet in an extra strip of wool. Not the young herder who's already planning the dawn's first check on the horses, and definitely not you, with your feet jammed as close to the stove as you dare without becoming tomorrow's breakfast story. It's this constant balancing act between bitter cold and borrowed warmth that defines your nights on the steppe. A mainstream historical fact for you, if you need a reason to respect your own resilience. The Mongol Empire at its peak was the largest contiguous land empire in history, and it was built by people who considered -40 a bit brisk. Their mastery of survival didn't come from luck, it came from centuries of figuring out how not to die when the mercury fled the thermometer. There's a reason their tents could be packed up and moved in a single morning, and their children learned to ride before they learned to walk. But let's not skip the fringe tidbits, because every culture has its quirks. Out here, some say the steppe foxes are the real rulers of the night, their sly eyes watching every campfire. Legend has it that if you hear a fox scream at midnight, it means the spirits are wandering. This might be why you suddenly find yourself double-checking the tent flaps. No one wants an unexpected visitor, furry or otherwise. Historians still argue whether these nightly rituals, layering furs, sharing stories and boiling up questionable chunks of meat, were born out of necessity or became cherished traditions simply because there wasn't much else to do when the wind howled. Was it resilience or just an elaborate distraction? Either way, it works. You've never been so grateful for a heavy coat or for the warmth of a stranger's smile when you stumble back into the yurt, half frozen but still laughing at your own foolishness. And just as you start thinking you might be adjusting, someone in the tent cracks a joke about the 3 stages of Mongol winter sleep. Stage 1, wrap up tight and listen to the wolves. Stage 2, Sleep as long as you can, until someone's cold feet find your back. Stage 3. Give up, get up, and start the tea. You laugh, because really, what else can you do? If you're lucky, the fire won't go out before sunrise. If you're even luckier, you'll remember to check your boots for spiders before putting them on. Yes, even in the dead of winter, steppe spiders don't care about the cold, apparently. That's another thing the guidebooks never tell you. As the wind rattles the sides of the jar and the world settles in for the night, you find yourself both oddly comforted and ever so slightly terrified. There's a humility to life here, a kind of whispered respect for the cold, for the animals, and for the people who somehow thrive in a place where most would last about an hour before begging for central heating. You tuck your hands deeper into the furs, and listen as the jar sighs with the wind, sturdy and fragile all at once. Outside, the sky is so clear you can count 100 stars. The moon throws silver across the snow, and somewhere you hear a child's laugh, bright and sharp as the ice. For a moment, you wonder how many nights like this have unfolded across the centuries. How many frozen toes, how many whispered prayers, how many sleepy jokes told just before the fire died down. It's a history you can feel in your bones. And it's only just begun. You wake with a start, unsure whether it's the thin chill slipping through the seams, or someone's elbow nudging you in their sleep. For a few groggy seconds, you're convinced you've become one with the pile of fur and wool, until a cough from the other side of the jar reminds you that this is not a soloid adventure. A soft glow escapes from the iron stove, struggling valiantly against the dark, and you realize you've made it night 1, on the steppe, alive and only a little frostbitten. That's worth a sleepy, self-satisfied grin. Before you can enjoy the warmth too much, you're ushered outside into the early dawn, your body protesting every step as you leave the cocoon of family heat. The air is sharper than any alarm clock, pinching your cheeks and turning your breath into quick clouds. Out here, survival is a design problem, and Mongols solved it centuries ago with a masterpiece, the jar. It's easy to dismiss the jar at first glance. To modern eyes, it's just a squat, round hut plopped onto a desolate plain, but the longer you spend among the herders, the more you appreciate its genius. The felt walls are layered thick with sheep's wool, nature's own insulation, both light and surprisingly cozy. The door always faces south, away from the worst of the winter wind, and the domed roof, with its wooden lattice work, lets smoke escape without losing much heat. Someone once joked that if IKEA had existed on the steppe, the Mongols would have sued for copyright infringement.
A mainstream historical fact worth whispering to yourself as you trace the wooden ribs. The Mongol jar's portable design meant entire families could move house in a single day. No wasted time, no bricks or mortar, just a clever combination of felt, wood, and the occasional family squabble over who packed the tent pegs last.
Historians still argue whether the concept of home for the Mongols was tied more to people or to the physical space, given that their homes could pick up and wander at a moment's notice. Maybe it was both. After all, in this world, shelter isn't a place, it's a strategy. There's a quirky side to all this efficiency too. Take the door, it's always low, so you have to stoop. Supposedly, this forces everyone, warrior, shaman, or stubborn uncle, to bow when entering. It's a built-in humility check, no matter who you are. Some say it keeps evil spirits out too, because apparently spirits are terrible at ducking. There's also a strict no shoes inside rule, which is less about cleanliness and more about keeping precious warmth in, and stray bits of frozen yak dung out. And yes, in case you're wondering, there is always someone who forgets, and they never hear the end of it.
Your host, already wide awake and somehow cheerful, shows you how the jar goes up and down. A lattice of wooden poles expands like an accordion, felt mats are rolled out, and a central crown ring supports the roof. The whole thing's held together with rope and hope.
You join in, your fingers quickly going numb, but it's oddly satisfying work. There's a rhythm to the assembly, a practiced choreography, and the unspoken understanding that if a storm rolls in, everyone pitches in, no exceptions. As you help secure the roof, a gust rattles the walls. Someone inside makes a joke about the Mongol space program. If the wind gets any stronger, maybe this ger will finally make it to the moon. You laugh, not because the joke is all that funny, but because the absurdity helps warm you up. Humour is just as essential as felt here, sometimes more so. There's a fringe tidbit for you. In especially brutal winters, some families double up, linking 2 or even 3 gers side by side with small felt tunnels. These ger complexes turn into impromptu social hubs, shared meals, endless tea, and at least one person whose snoring could rival a snowstorm. Imagine the steppe's own answer to apartment living, only with more livestock and fewer noisy neighbours, unless you count the sheep. By the time the ger is fully upright, the sun has crawled over the horizon, painting the sky with a pink that's almost warm enough to believe. You stand back and admire the structure, sturdy yet portable, ancient yet alive. The wind howls, but the ger stands firm, a soft round miracle on the open plain. You duck back inside and feel the immediate relief. The stove's heat is gentle, not fierce, but combined with layers of felt, it's enough. Someone's pouring hot tea from a battered kettle, steam curling in the smoky light. You settle in, grateful that centuries of trial and error have distilled into this simple, beautiful survival tool. As you sip, you wonder, did the first person to dream up the ger realize it would one day house empires, armies, and 1,000 generations of steppe survivors? Or was it just one tired herder thinking, there's got to be a better way? Historians still argue whether the ger originated in Mongolia or wandered over from Siberia, evolving as it crossed the endless grasslands. Wherever it began, it's here now, keeping you alive, one windy dawn at a time. You pull your furs tighter and smile. The wind can do its worst. For now, you're home. The wind never really stops out here. Even as the sun lifts a pale orange disk above the horizon, you can feel the cold chewing at your bones. If you've never handled yak dung before, congratulations. It's an experience you might not have put on your bucket list, but here on the steppe, it's as precious as gold in winter. Each dried clump represents hours of foraging, collecting and drying during the brief summer, all so your toes don't snap off come January. The smell is earthy, not unpleasant, and honestly, after a few days, you barely notice. There's something gently absurd about the fact that the Mongols, famous for conquering half the known world, were just as famous among each other for their epic dung collecting skills. If you're ever in a Mongol trivia contest, remember this: yak dung is the original steppe energy drink. A mainstream historical fact. Without abundant forests, Mongols relied almost entirely on animal dung, yak, sheep, horse, for cooking and heating fuel. Dried dung burns hot and surprisingly clean, especially when packed right. It's this very fuel that powered not just homes, but at times even the makeshift field forges and mobile smithies that kept armies equipped. Historians still argue whether dung use was a desperate adaptation or a clever ecological solution. But either way, it kept families and empires warm for centuries. Someone tells the story of a distant uncle who let the dung run out one winter. He spent the rest of his days known as frozen toes. Every community has one. There's also a quirky, surprisingly practical use for dung you hadn't expected: smoke control. In some gers, families would burn dung with a bit of mugwort or wild sage. The smoke helped keep biting insects and the ever-present steppe mice at bay. Plus, rumour has it chased away evil spirits, though most folks admit the spirits probably just didn't like the smell. As you kneel beside the stove, feeding it another handful of precious fuel, Someone jokes, it's not a real Mongol winter unless you wake up and find the tea frozen in your cup.
You snort, because honestly, it's probably true. The tea, for what it's worth, is salty and strong, milky with a tang of something you can't quite place. You drink it anyway, grateful for the heat.
It's easy to forget you're drinking the same kind of tea Genghis Khan's armies once gulped down on frosty mornings. Mongols today still make Surul Tsai, a salty milk tea, almost unchanged from 1,000 years ago. Outside, life stirs. Horses huddle together, steam rising from their flanks, while goats and sheep are nudged awake. You marvel at the animals' toughness. After all, the same wind that makes your eyes water barely ruffles their coats. You wonder aloud if anyone's ever seen a yak shiver. Your host grins. Not unless you forget to feed them, he replies. And yes, more than one tale exists of a family dog absconding with a precious ember pot in the night, resulting in frigid toes and a sheepish apology come dawn. Historians still argue whether the widespread reliance on dung was something the Mongols boasted about, or quietly endured. Some sources paint it as a badge of honor, proof of their ability to thrive in a land where trees are rarer than diamonds. Others suggest that given half a chance, anyone would have swapped to wood or coal in a heart, but there's no denying that the rhythm of dung collecting, stacking, and burning is woven into the fabric of steppe survival. You pile up a few more patties, brush your gloves together, and head back inside. The stove hisses softly. Someone started a batch of dough, the yeasty smell barely winning over the smoky air. You settle in, realizing that here, even the most humble materials are transformed by ingenuity. Out on the steppe, nothing is wasted, especially not a winter's worth of yak dung. You notice something about Mongol fashion. After just a few days, it's less about looking good and more about keeping every single ounce of warmth exactly where it belongs, close to your skin. You rise from your sleeping spot, stretching the stiffness from your arms, and immediately reach for the robe hanging by the stove. But this isn't just any robe, it's a deal. The traditional, ingeniously layered Mongol outerwear that's seen more winters than you've had hot dinners. As you shrug it on, the fabric falls heavy and reassuring across your shoulders. The deal is thick, usually made of wool, and reaches all the way down to your boots, which, by the way, are fur-lined and turned up at the toes. These boots are designed not just for warmth, but for ease of slipping on and off when ducking into the ger, or more likely, chasing after a runaway goat. You cinch the wide sash around your waist, careful to leave enough room for the layers underneath, a system so effective that even today outdoor enthusiasts are jealous of the Mongols' no-fuss insulation. A mainstream historical fact to file away, the deal's wraparound design isn't just a fashion statement. It's perfectly tailored for horseback riding, the lifeblood of Mongol society. The overlapping flaps keep out wind and snow, and the deep pocket formed by the sash becomes an all-purpose carry-all, snacks, knife, or the ever-important fire flint. The Mongols knew that the best winter gear wasn't something fancy, it was whatever got you from sunrise to sunset with all your toes intact. There's a quirky rule you learn on your first day: always fasten your deal right over left. To do it the other way round is said to invite bad luck, or worse, mimic the way the dead are dressed for burial. Even now, as you try to remember which side goes where, someone jokes, if your robe's wrong, so is your fortune.
It's a reminder that tradition, like the wind, never really leaves the steppe. Historians still argue whether the Mongol love of layers was purely practical, or if it took on a ritual significance over centuries.
Some say each piece of clothing, from the woolen undertunic to the outer felt coat, represented a shield against more than just cold, but against misfortune itself. Others insist the Mongols were simply cold and sensible people, with no need to overthink a good thing. You join the morning ritual of dressing, working with what feels like half a sheet's worth of wool. The children, already bundled, look like little bears tumbling about the chair. Your fingers, stiff from the cold, fumble with the toggles, but you're getting the hang of it. The elders, meanwhile, inspect your handiwork with amusement. Still too much ankle showing. Once properly swaddled, you step outside, the cold now more of a polite suggestion than a threat. The wind tugs playfully at your sleeves but can't quite get through. You watch as your companions ready their horses, their own robes and hats, forming a parade of earthy reds, browns and blues. Fur hats with ear flaps are the finishing touch, a badge of honour for anyone who's spent more than a season out here. The hats are topped with little knots or beads, each telling a quiet story of family or tribe. A fringe tidbit: on festival days, some Mongols swap out their plain winter deals for ones embroidered with colourful patterns, the stitches tracing out ancestral tales or wishes for luck. During Naadam, the great summer games, you might see a wrestler still sporting his winter deal, sleeves rolled up, ready to test his strength against the world and the weather. You trudge after the others, warmth sealed in by your layers. There's a certain swagger to walking around in a deal, boots crunching over the frost, sash tied just so. Someone hands you a strip of felt to tuck into your collar. Another small layer, another quiet victory over the cold. It's a game of patience, creativity, and sometimes stubbornness. You wonder aloud if there's a prize for best dressed in the ger tonight. The answer, of course, is survival. As the sun creeps higher, you begin to forget just how cold it is. The layers do their work, and soon your thoughts turn to breakfast and the promise of hot tea. Before you head back inside, you give yourself a little shake. Wrapped up this way, you're not just protected from the elements. You're dressed in centuries of wisdom, tradition, and a little bit of superstition. It's not exactly a runway look, but here it's all the style you'll ever need. The first rays of sun barely warm the air, but inside the ger, life is already in motion. You're nudged awake by the aroma of something sour and slightly sweet, breakfast Mongol style, and you quickly learn this isn't your usual bowl of oatmeal. Instead, your hosts hand you a wooden cup filled with a frothy, milky liquid, kumis. It's fermented mare's milk, tangy and sharp, and when you take your first tentative sip, it's like getting a jolt of electricity straight from the steppe itself. There's no point pretending it's love at first taste, but in this cold, you're grateful for any calories that don't freeze on contact. Kumis is a staple for the Mongols, and you soon find out why. It's packed with nutrients, protein, vitamins, and just enough alcohol to take the edge off a sleepless, windy night. Not that anyone's getting drunk off breakfast, but you do sense a collective sense of satisfaction around the family circle as everyone passes the cup. Some of the elders joke that the secret to surviving Mongol winters is simple. You need as many layers inside your stomach as outside it. You laugh along, even as your lips pucker from the tang. A mainstream historical fact to mull over as you finish your drink. Kumis was so important to Mongol society that it became a kind of currency, used in rituals, celebrations, and even as diplomatic gifts. Genghis Khan himself was said to have favoured it, supposedly drinking vast quantities before battle, though historians still argue whether this was heroic fortification or just a convenient excuse for his sometimes questionable campaign decisions. Either way, the stuff stuck around, and even today, Mongol herders brew it the same way: fresh mare's milk, a starter from the last batch, and a barrel left to bubble in the shade all summer. There's a fringe tidbit about kumis you pick up from a passing joke. Some Mongols claim kumis can cure everything from a head cold to a broken heart, as long as you drink enough and don't mind the side effects. One old uncle swears he once saw a horse that looked happier after finishing off a forgotten bucket. You suspect this is an ongoing family debate. Does kumis make you strong, or just cheerful enough to forget the cold? Once breakfast is done, The teapot comes back to life, now filled with suta taisai, salty milk tea. The first sip is always a surprise, hot, creamy, and with a briny kick that makes you wonder if someone switched your cup for soup. It's a warming comfort, poured generously, and you notice that every visitor is offered tea before anything else. The etiquette is simple. Refuse once to be polite, accept on the second offer to show you're not a rude guest, and then keep your cup ready for a constant refill. Mongol hospitality is measured in cups poured and stories shared, not minutes or formality. While you sip, you nibble on bortsog, deep-fried dough that looks like little golden pillows and crunches pleasantly between your teeth. Dried curds, called abaru, are handed out too, chewy, tart, and packed with the energy you'll need for the cold day ahead. Someone offers you a slice of dried meat, preserved last autumn, and still almost frozen. You gnaw on it, savouring the smoky flavour, and realise just how essential preservation is in a place where winter always wings the calendar. There's something both casual and ceremonial about this breakfast. It's not fancy, but it's built for survival. Everyone seems to know the right balance between filling up and saving food for later, especially the children, who are quietly handed extra bortsog to stash in their pockets for mid-morning snacking. Someone makes a joke about how the only thing Mongols hoard more than dried cheese is good firewood.
Laughter bounces off the felt walls, and you feel the heaviness of sleep and cold finally start to lift. Historians still argue whether the famous Mongol hardiness came from their diet or their attitude.
Some claim it's all in the genes, that centuries of life on horseback and fermented milk made steppe people tougher than anyone else. Others insist it's the result of growing up in a world where you learn to appreciate whatever is put before you, especially when the nearest grocery store is about 1,000 kilometers away and the weather is rarely on your side. Breakfast done, you set your cup aside and help pack up the morning meal. The yurt is filled with that gentle, satisfying clutter that means everyone has eaten their fill. Crumbs of bread, empty cups, a small mound of leftover aril. The stove hisses contentedly, fueled by one more round of yak done, and the air inside is as warm as you can hope for. You pull on your boots, cinch your deal tight, and head for the door, fortified by 1,000 years of Mongol wisdom and just enough kumis to keep you smiling. You step outside, the cold nipping at your cheeks with renewed vigour, and watch as your hosts begin saddling up the horses. It's another day on the steppe, and the weather isn't about to wait for anyone's comfort.
The wind swirls with little flurries of snow,
Carrying with it the sharp smell of horse sweat and frosty grass. You find yourself marvelling at the sheer routine of it all. How, no matter the temperature, horses are brushed, saddles are tightened, and the day's work marches on.
Welcome to the Mongol morning commute.
There's a well-practiced choreography to these early hours. You watch, slightly envious, as hands move with brisk certainty, checking straps, knotting ropes, and cinching fur saddle blankets. Each horse stands calmly, steam rising from its nostrils, seemingly as unfazed by the biting wind as the people tending them. You shiver in your layers and realize your survival out here depends not only on warm clothing, but on being part of the daily movement, the endless cycle of care, travel, and return.
A mainstream historical fact. Mongols are renowned as some of the greatest horsemen in history, with children learning to ride almost before they learn to walk.
Their mobility, through blizzards, sandstorms, and endless miles of nothing, was legendary. It's often said that a Mongol without a horse is only half a person. Historians still argue whether the Mongols' mastery of horsemanship was purely necessity, or if it grew into a cultural identity by design. Either way, the result is the same. Every task, no matter how routine, is anchored by the unbreakable bond between horse and rider. As you fumble with the bridle, ropes stubborn, fingers clumsy in the cold, a teenager grins and demonstrates the proper knot. There's a gentle pride in the lesson, a sense of passing down not just a trick but a whole worldview, in a place where the weather can shift from calm to cruel in minutes. A secure saddle can mean the difference between reaching your herd or spending the night lost in a whiteout. You silently vow to pay more attention. Your companions mount up, and soon you're off, horses picking their way across the brittle grass and icy puddles. The landscape rolls out before you, endless and somehow both beautiful and terrifying. The wind stings your face, but the motion warms your blood, and you find yourself falling into the rhythm of hoofbeats, thud, crunch, thud. Every so often, a rider calls out to check on a straggler, or shouts a joke about imported Italian saddles, which you soon learn is local code for sitting on an extra yak pelt. There's a quirky tidbit. Some Mongols will actually tuck hot stones, fresh from the Jur stove, into their boots before heading out. The warmth lasts just long enough to get them to the next shelter, and if you're lucky, it doesn't burn a hole in your sock. Someone boasts about having the toasty toes of a con, and the group laughs, because out here, even a warm foot is a victory worth celebrating. Despite the snow, there are chores to do, herding sheep, checking on distant livestock, and ensuring nothing's wandered too close to the wolves. You notice that the horses themselves seem nearly impervious to cold, their coats thick and glistening, their movements confident and sure. A small herd of sheep trudges behind, braving the elements as stubbornly as their caretakers. If you're too slow, the sheep will simply wander off. No steppe weather report required. Historians still argue whether the Mongols' legendary ability to navigate vast distances in such brutal conditions was the result of inherited knowledge or just plain stubbornness. Some scholars say their maps were mostly in their heads, landmarks passed down through generations. Every twist in a river or shape of a hill memorized by stories around the evening fire. After a few hours, you realize you're not just surviving, you're participating. You help round up the flock, pausing occasionally to thump your boots together and make sure your toes are still attached. When you finally head back to camp, cheeks flushed and legs aching, there's a sense of accomplishment you haven't felt in ages. Even the wind seems less menacing, somehow. As you unsaddle your horse and brush down its coat, someone winks and offers you a handful of dried meat. Not bad for a beginner, they tease. And you grin, feeling oddly at home. The day isn't done, and neither is the cold, but you're starting to get the hang of it. And as you watch the sunset blur into a violet haze, you realize every day on the steppe is survival, but also a kind of dance, a defiant, communal, slightly sarcastic answer to the endless winter. You finally settle down in the Jur after a day of riding and herding, your cheeks stinging and your nose running, the very picture of winter resilience, at least in your own mind. Your stomach rumbles, and your thoughts drift to dinner. If you're imagining a steaming pot of stew, or a warm loaf of bread, adjust those expectations on the steppe. Dinner is a choose-your-own adventure, of dried, raw, and sometimes just plain frozen. It's time to meet the Mongol winter snack menu. A platter is set before you. Strips of meat so dry they could probably double as kindling. Curls of cheese so hard you wonder if they're actually for eating or sharpening knives. And mysterious frozen chunks that might once have been soup. You take a tentative bite of balls, air-dried beef or mutton, and feel your jaw working overtime. The taste is rich and smoky, surprisingly satisfying once you accept that chewing is more of an upper body workout than a mealtime activity. You chase it with a nibble of arawil, the infamous dried curds, which start off sharp and tart, and then melt into a creamy tang. There's a reason Mongol teeth are strong. These snacks are less bite-sized and more bite-back. A mainstream historical fact to crunch on. The art of food preservation was essential to Mongol survival. With winter lasting up to 8 months, and fresh food a rarity, Mongol families dried meat, pressed cheese, and even froze leftovers to see them through until the grass returned. What didn't get eaten by people was often fed to the animals. Nothing went to waste. In fact, dried meat was so central to Mongol life that it travelled with the armies, fueling soldiers across continents. Historians still argue whether this basic portable diet was the secret behind Mongol military stamina, or simply the only option in a landscape where nothing grows from October to May. You quickly learn to appreciate the efficiency. No need for spices, ovens, or even a fire. Just a sharp knife and some patience. And there's a fringe tidbit that makes you smile. Some Mongols would keep their strips of meat tucked inside their deals during the day, letting body heat soften them just enough to make chewing less of a survival challenge. It's like a slow cooker, but powered by your armpit. When someone hands you a small rock-hard ball of frozen yogurt, you ask if it's a treat or a weapon. The answer, delivered deadpan, is depends on who you throw it at. There's a running joke in the Jur about the Mongol refrigerator. Any windowsill, rock, or shaded patch of ground will do. If it's cold enough outside, your dinner will keep until spring, assuming the dogs or foxes don't get to it first. You wrap a leftover piece of meat in cloth and set it by the door, marveling at the simplicity of this ancient food storage system. No electricity, no preservatives, just trust in the cold and your own appetite. A child wanders by, gnawing happily on a piece of areoul. You ask if they ever get tired of dried food, and they shrug with the wisdom of someone who's never known anything else. In winter, everything is frozen, even the soup. We just chew faster, they say, and everyone laughs.
Historians still argue whether the reliance on such hearty, unyielding snacks was a cultural badge of honor or a necessary compromise. Was it stubbornness, frugality, or just good sense?
Whatever the reason, you find that with each bite, no matter how jaw-aching, it's not just your hunger you're feeding. It's a sense of connection, a way of sharing in the relentless creativity of people who learned over centuries to make the most of what little the land could offer. As you chew the last bite and your jaw finally begins to thaw, you realize something else. Here, a meal isn't about luxury or ease. It's about survival, yes, but also about cleverness, community, and the satisfaction of turning winter's scarcity into a strange kind of feast. It might not be gourmet, but it's a taste you won't forget. The steppe, for all its emptiness, is never truly quiet. As dusk slides across the horizon, and you step outside the Jur, the world seems to vibrate with 100 tiny lives, some friendly, some a little less so. You pause, listening, your breath fogging in the cold, and realize the Mongols aren't the only ones out here trying to make it through another brutal winter. Off to your left, a pack of wolves howls long, low, and oddly melodic. Your host, unfazed, throws a stick onto the fire, and assures you it's a good sign. The wolves are hunting elsewhere tonight. If you hear silence, he says with a sly grin, that's when you worry. Apparently, steppe wolves have perfected the art of dramatic timing. Still, you keep one eye on the shadows, just in case the evening's entertainment turns interactive. A mainstream historical fact. Mongol herders developed a wary respect for the predators of the steppe. Wolves, eagles, and snow leopards all roamed these endless plains, occasionally snatching a sheep or two. Yet, rather than wiping them out, the Mongols learned to coexist, sometimes even celebrating these animals in their stories, songs, and superstitions. Historians still argue whether this was genuine reverence for the natural world, or simply a practical calculation. Fighting the land gets you nowhere, but making peace with it might just get you through the night. You move closer to the fire, as someone recounts an old legend about the origin of wolves and men, how both were born of the same mother, destined to share the same cold, hungry land. There's a pride in these stories, the sense that surviving here means understanding your place in the wider scheme, never imagining you're alone. But it's not just the big predators you contend with. The wind, ever the trickster, snakes its way under your scarf, flicks at your ears, and whispers through the cracks of the Jur. There's a saying that the wind on the steppe has 1,000 voices. Tonight it's telling you to stay sharp. Your host wraps an extra scarf around your neck and points to a fresh set of animal tracks leading away from camp. Foxes, he says, or maybe a very sneaky dog. Either way, the message is clear. The steppe is shared territory, and everyone's hungry. A quirky tidbit: in deep winter, Mongol families sometimes used bells and shiny scraps of metal on their livestock to ward off both wolves and mischief spirits. The bells tinkle all night, and you wonder how anyone gets any sleep, but your host insists it's better than waking up to a missing sheep, or worse, an angry grandmother with an empty stew pot.
As night deepens, the ger glows warmly in the darkness, its felt walls holding the cold at bay. Yet you sense, just beyond the firelight, eyes watching, curious, calculating.
Horses shift and snort, herded together in a protective circle. You can't help but marvel at their calm, a lesson in resilience, passed down through generations of survival. It's as if they've learnt to accept the dangers as part of life's routine, never panicking unless their humans do first.
Historians still argue whether the Mongols' tolerance for these nightly visitors was a survival tactic or a byproduct of steppe mythology, where animals are both companions and adversaries, symbols and sustenance. Some say it's why the Mongol Empire expanded so easily, a people at home in uncertainty, unafraid of the wildness at the edge of the fire. You linger by the flames, drawn to the stories and the sense of shared danger. Someone hands you another chunk of dried meat and whispers, "Eat quickly, before the foxes get bold." You oblige, glancing at the shadows, and let yourself relax, just enough to enjoy the drama. It's another night on the steppe, the boundary between civilization and wilderness, as thin as the felt walls around you. As you finally duck back into the ger, you find yourself strangely grateful for the company of wolves, wind, and everything in between. Out here you realize every sound is a reminder. You're not alone, and you never really were. The temperature drops further as darkness settles, but inside the ger, it feels like a different world. The cold outside bites and prowls, but within these felt walls you're wrapped in a kind of warmth you can't quite explain, part stove, part body heat, part that inexplicable sense of togetherness that seems to blossom when the rest of the world is trying its best to freeze you out. You realize quickly that the secret to surviving a Mongol winter isn't just the layers on your back, but the bodies pressed close, the stories shared, and the comfort of sleeping surrounded by people, livestock, and sometimes the odd dog who has very strong opinions about blanket ownership. Sleeping in the ger isn't a solitary affair. Tonight, as you nestle into your corner, you're sharing space with a tangle of arms, legs, and fur. Children burrow into sleeping rolls, parents pile furs higher, and the elderly tuck their feet beneath the bellies of dogs who have absolutely no shame about snoring or stealing your best spot. A baby fusses, soothed quickly by a mother's low humming voice, a lullaby as old as the steppes. If you listen, you could almost hear the centuries humming along, a chorus of the sleeping, the hopeful, and the weary.
A mainstream historical fact. Mongol families often shared one ger, especially in the harshest months, forming close multi-generational sleeping arrangements.
It was the only way to make the most of every scrap of warmth, and to ensure that even the youngest or frailest were never left alone on a cold night. This close communal sleeping humans, dogs, sometimes even a newborn lamb tucked in for extra heat, helped ensure survival. Historians still argue whether these sleeping arrangements were purely for practical warmth, or if they forged the deep bonds of kinship that made Mongol society so uniquely tight-knit. Was it a matter of necessity or affection? Maybe in winter it was always a bit of both. It's not all tender moments and soft lullabies, of course. Mongol gers at night are a chorus of snores, coughs, giggles, and the occasional "who stole my fur?" whispered accusation. Someone's always shifting, hunting for the warmest spot. Someone else inevitably kicks off their coverings, only to wake up cold and remorseful. And there's always that one uncle who starts telling a story in his sleep, prompting laughter or groans depending on the hour. There's a quirky tidbit to this bedtime routine. The place of honor is not always closest to the fire. It's more often closest to the door, where you're first up to feed the stove, check the animals, or fend off any nighttime visitors, human or otherwise. It's both a privilege and a burden, so you try to feign sleep when that spot is up for grabs. As the jar settles, the breathing of those around you sinks into a soothing rhythm. The stove hisses quietly, embers glowing orange and gold. Furs and bodies trap the warmth, and you're grateful for every layer, every shared heartbeat. You find yourself drifting, lulled by the steady sound of snoring dogs and the soft rise and fall of family voices. A child mumbles something in their sleep, and someone else giggles, another memory stitched into the fabric of the jet. Historians still argue whether the unity and legendary discipline of Mongol clans came from the battlefield or from nights just like this, pressed together against the cold, sharing not just heat, but dreams, worries, and whispered jokes. While some scholars insist that these nights bred a loyalty that would carry Mongols across continents, others say it's simply the inevitable result of having nowhere else to go when the mercury drops. You turn, adjust your furs, and stare at the curve of the jar ceiling. Above you, the stars are hidden by felt and smoke, but you know they're there, countless and cold, while here, you're safe, if only for a few hours. It's a fleeting piece, but it feels as rich as gold. As your eyes finally grow heavy, you catch one last bit of advice from your host. If you wake before the fire does, you get first pick of the hot tea. You promise yourself you'll remember that, even as sleep pulls you under, wrapped in the collective warmth and wisdom of 1,000 winters survived, together. You wake to a dull ache in your toes, and a persistent, low whistle from somewhere outside the jar. Dawn on the steppe doesn't arrive with soft light and bird songs. It slaps you awake with a draft under the felt door, and the realization that your socks are still. Somehow damp, you groan, stretch, and wiggle your half-frozen feet, already dreading the moment they hit the floor. But there's no lounging in bed here. The animals need you, the fire needs feeding, and you're still a long way from mastering the Mongol winter. As you shuffle outside, you see others are already up and about. Horses, sheep, and goats gather in tight clusters, their breath rising in great white plumes. The livestock seem almost cheerful. Clearly, they didn't spend the night with your toes. Tending to the animals is a group effort. Everyone has a job, fetching water, chipping away at the thick ice over the trough, scattering hay and checking for any creatures who might not have made it through the night. A mainstream historical fact. Mongols relied on their herds for nearly everything: meat, milk, clothing, and even fuel in the form of dung. Without healthy animals, there could be no survival, let alone the fierce mobility the Mongols were famous for. This deep interdependence between human and herd is woven into the culture, still alive today in every daily winter ritual. Historians still argue whether the Mongol horse or the sheep was the more valuable asset. Some claim the horse enabled conquest, while others say the humble sheep kept families alive one winter at a time. You limp over to the sheep pen, toes protesting with every step. One of your hosts shows you how to rub your feet together inside your boots to spark a little heat. There's a certain stubborn pride in ignoring discomfort. Frostbitten toes build character. Someone laughs, and you pretend to agree, hoping your own toes are learning something useful. You spend the next hour in a delicate ballet of animal management. The horses are led out first, their thick winter coats gleaming. You're handed a brush and set to work on a shaggy mare, her patience rivaling that of a saint. In between strokes, you're told stories about legendary horses that once ran from sunrise to sunset without stopping, fueled by nothing more than frozen grass and stubborn Mongol willpower. There's a quirky tidbit about horse care on the steppe. Some herders gently heat stones in the fire and tuck them under the horse blankets before dawn. It's a small luxury steppe spa day, Mongol edition. The horses seem to appreciate it, though one old gelding makes a show of acting offended, just for the attention. The sheep, meanwhile, demand less pampering but more vigilance. Foxes and wolves are always on the lookout for a stray lamb.
You help chip ice from the water buckets, fingers stinging. The process is rhythmic, almost meditative if you ignore the pain. Someone offers you a mug of hot tea between chores, and you grip it with numb hands, letting the warmth seep into your bones.
The animals, oblivious to your struggles, butt heads playfully or stand chewing cud, content in the morning bustle. Historians still argue whether the communal aspect of animal care was the foundation of Mongol society's remarkable unity, or simply the only way to get through a winter when every resource was shared and every life depended on teamwork. Perhaps it's both. Either way, as you trudge back to the chair, feet tingling and heart pumping, you realize how much survival out here relies not just on your own strength, but on the shared effort of many hands, and of course many stubborn toes. Inside, the fire is blazing again, the air rich with the scent of boiling milk and singed felt. You peel off your boots and examine your toes. They're pink, achy, and by some miracle, all accounted for. Someone winks at you from across the jar, holding out another pair of wool socks just in case.
You accept them with gratitude, already preparing for another round of steppe survival. You're feeling more alive now, toes tingling and the smell of breakfast still lingering in your nostrils, when someone suggests it's time for a bath.
You almost laugh. Surely this is a joke. A bath? Out here where water turns to ice before it hits the ground, and the wind will freeze the smile on your face if you linger too long. But your hosts are serious, and soon you're following a small group toward the riverbank, a bundle of soapot and towels in tow. You're not sure if this is courage, madness, or just another way to pass a long frozen morning. A mainstream historical fact, Mongols prized cleanliness, even in the harshest conditions. They washed hands and faces daily, and made special efforts to stay clean for rituals, holidays, and occasionally just to break up the monotony. Genghis Khan reportedly encouraged his men to keep themselves tidy, knowing disease could spread rapidly in crowded camps. Historians still argue whether this focus on hygiene was a practical necessity or part of a deeper belief that physical cleanliness warded off evil spirits as well as sickness. For today, you stick to the sensible option, a steaming pot of water heated over the Jer's stove, carried outside for a quick scrub behind the ears. Even this feels daring. With your shirt off and steam billowing into the crisp air, you scrub fast, every splash of water a jewel between warmth and frostbite. The children cheer you on, cackling as they threaten to dump snow down your back. You retaliate by flicking water at their bare ankles, and everyone collapses in laughter, even as the wind tries to freeze the drops before they hit the ground. There's a fringe tidbit passed down in whispers. Some families used to collect snow in special bowls during the first storm of the season. They believed that washing with this pure snow would bring luck, good health, or at least an extra layer of fortitude against the winter. Occasionally, you'll see an elder scoop up a handful of powdery snow, rub it across their face, and declare themselves invincible for the day. Whether this is actual magic or just the placebo effect, no one seems to mind. After your hasty bath, you dress quickly, grateful for the felt layers and fur hat waiting by the fire. You can't help but admire the resourcefulness, heated stones, boiled water, and even the humble snowball, all pressed into service in the ongoing campaign for basic cleanliness. Someone jokes that if you survive a Mongol bath, you can survive anything. You're inclined to agree. Historians still argue whether these winter baths were widespread tradition or the territory of outliers, eccentric old warriors, and show-off teenagers Some claim the practice goes back centuries, others insist it's mostly legend, exaggerated each time someone dares the plunge. Either way, it's part of the winter tapestry, a mix of necessity bravado and stubborn optimism. You head back to the jar with a new appreciation for the challenge of staying clean in a world where soap freezes if you leave it unattended. Inside, the warmth is heavenly. You rub your hair dry, join the laughter of your hosts, and realize that here, even something as simple as a bath is a test of courage, and a reminder that winter can't stop you from living, only make you more creative in the attempt. Felt and fur, it turns out, are more than cozy. They're the very reason you aren't an icicle right now. Your host invites you to inspect the walls, thick layers of felt, stitched together from sheep's wool, pressed and pounded until dense enough to repel wind and hold in precious heat. The felt smells faintly of lanolin and old campfires, and as you press your hand to it, you realize just how well it works. In the middle of a steppe winter, this soft, humble fabric becomes a fortress. It muffles sound, softens drafts, and traps every scrap of warmth from the iron stove. A well-made felt wall, you're told, is worth more than gold out here. A mainstream historical fact, the art of felt making is older than recorded Mongol history. Nomads perfected it long before Genghis Khan, using it not just for gers, but for boots, hats, saddlebags, and even baby cradles. Historians still argue whether Mongol felt techniques were invented independently or borrowed from neighbouring Turkic peoples. Whatever the case, the process itself is mesmerizing. Piles of carded wool are sprinkled with hot water, rolled, stomped, and kneaded until they form a dense, seamless mat. It's slow, satisfying work, often accompanied by singing and gossip, making it both practical and social. There's a quirky tidbit about winter insulation too. Many families keep a lucky felt patch, a small, beautifully embroidered square believed to keep away the worst drafts and bring prosperity. These patches are often gifts for weddings or births, each with its own design spirals for eternity, ram's horns for strength, and sometimes little animals tucked into the corners for good luck. You're offered a glimpse at one tucked discreetly above the stove, the threads gleaming in the firelight. Fur, of course, is the next essential line of defense. Hats lined with fox or wolf, gloves stuffed with rabbit, collars trimmed in sheepskin. There's an art to choosing the right combination for the weather, and a quiet pride in a particularly fluffy hat. The family's collection of winter gear is stored in neat bundles by the door, ready for anyone who needs an extra layer. You try on a pair of fur mittens, and immediately lose all dexterity but gain a superpower. Your fingers are actually warm. You watch as the youngest child in the chair carefully sews another felt patch into the sleeve of her deal, tongue poked out in concentration. Someone jokes that Mongol children learn to sew before they can ride, which, judging by the nimbleness of her fingers, is only a mild exaggeration. You help by threading a needle, rewarded with a lopsided grin and the promise that your handiwork will keep her arm warm all the way to spring. Historians still argue whether these homegrown insulation tricks are the key to Mongol endurance, or just one chapter in a longer story of steppe survival. Some claim it's the combination of felt and fur used wisely, repaired often, and always customized that turned gers into portable palaces. Others insist it's just one piece in a wider puzzle, part engineering, part community, part sheer luck. You stretch out near the stove, wrapped in a borrowed fur, and listen to the household chatter. The wind rattles the felt, but you're unbothered now, a little smug in your warm cocoon. There's satisfaction in the simple things, a well-mended patch, a good pair of mittens, a draftless wall. Out here, cleverness is survival, and the ancient wisdom of felt and fur is your quiet, reliable shield against the fiercest cold. You're starting to feel more comfortable in your fortress of felt and fur, but as the days tick by, you can't help but notice the subtle, almost mystical rituals woven into daily life. One morning, you're awakened not by the groan of wind against the ger, but by the rhythmic chanting of the family shaman, a presence at once familiar and mysterious, her voice low and gravelly, calling out to ancestors, animals, and whatever unseen forces might be listening beyond the swirling snow. In the Mongol world, the winter's harshness isn't just a physical enemy, it's spiritual too. The shaman, dressed in a robe festooned with beads, animal bones and tiny bells, circles the center of the ger. The air is thick with the smoke of burning juniper and mugwort, believed to purify and strengthen both the soul and the body. You watch as she sprinkles a handful of herbs onto the glowing stove, and for a moment, the air shimmers with fragrant, hopeful warmth. A mainstream historical fact: shamans, or bowen in Mongolian, played a central role in the spiritual and medical life of the steppe. They were healers, counselors, and guardians against bad luck, especially in winter, when sickness and accidents were never far away. Mongol armies carried their shamans on campaign, relying on them for blessings, omens, and the occasional pep talk before a big raid. Historians still argue whether the shamans truly wielded supernatural powers or simply understood the practical medicine of herbs and ritual, giving people the comfort of tradition in a world that often seemed out to get them. Today, you're witness to a winter ritual, the smoke blessing. The shaman waves her hands, casting the smoke in great arcs over the heads of the family, murmuring words both familiar and strange. Even the children fall quiet, their eyes wide, instinctively respectful of the mystery. There's a touch of drama, a shake of the drum, a rattle of a stick, adorned with fox teeth, and then a collective exhale, as if the ger itself is breathing easier. Whether it's spiritual or psychological, everyone sits up a little straighter afterward, convinced that, at least for now, the worst of the winter spirits have been driven off. There's a quirky tidbit about Mongol medicine. Many families keep a pouch of dried herbs, or a sliver of wolf bone, as a sort of pocket talisman. Some claim these charms protect against frostbite. Others say they help a rider's horse find its way home through a blizzard. Your host presents you with a tiny felt bag filled with juniper berries, for luck and strong lungs. You accept it, tucking it deep in your deal, feeling a strange comfort in this blend of faith and folk science. Occasionally, someone falls ill, a cough that won't quit, a fever that makes sweat bead even in the cold. The shaman is called, and the air in the ger becomes dense with whispered prayers and pungent smoke. She brews up teas from wild thyme, artemisia, and the ever-present yak butter, urging the sick to sip slowly, wrapping them in extra layers of fur and hope. Whether it's the herbs, the warmth, or the belief itself, you can't deny that most people seem to pull through, often with a story to tell, about the winter spirits who nearly carried them away. Historians still argue whether these healing rituals truly made a difference, or if survival on the steppe was more about luck, resilience, and the immune system built on a diet of fermented milk and air-dried meat. Some scholars point to the surprising longevity of many elders, suggesting that perhaps there's more to these traditions than modern medicine would admit. Outside, the world is still a white blur of wind and shifting drifts, but inside, the ger pulses with energy, a mingling of old beliefs and practical know-how. The shaman, having finished her rites, settles in for a cup of salty tea, smiling at you with a knowing glint. She taps her drum once, softly, and says, "The cold is strong, but your spirit is stronger. Remember that." You do, whether it's the smoke, the stories, or just the stubborn hope that comes with surviving one more day. You feel lighter, warmed from the inside out. In the heart of winter, a little magic goes a long way. The scent of smoke and simmering fat drifts through the ger as another morning breaks, and you're reminded yet again that Mongol winters aren't just endured, they're engineered day by day, one creative meal at a time. As the family prepares for another venture outside, you are invited to join the winter hunt, a practice that is equal parts necessity, tradition, and occasionally wild adventure. Stepping out into the wind, you notice the hunters are already busy. Their bows are strung and quivers loaded, fur hats pulled low against the cold. Everyone moves with purpose. On the steppe, food security is a winter-long chess match with nature, and every family has at least one person skilled in tracking, trapping, and improvising when the usual supplies run thin. You tag along behind, trying to keep your footsteps quiet, the crunch of snow under your boots sounding impossibly loud. The hunters scan for the tiniest clues, a tuft of fur snagged on a bush, faint tracks in the powdery snow, the scurry of a marmot or hare darting across the open ground. Patience is the order of the day.
You soon realise this is less about brute strength and more about reading the land, a living map passed down from parent to child. Sometimes you're told luck delivers a deer or wild sheep.
More often, the day's prize is smaller, a rabbit, a few wild birds, even the occasional fox, though catching one is a feat worth boasting about all winter. A mainstream historical fact, Mongol cuisine adapted to what the steppe provided, especially in the cold months. Meat, fresh, dried, or smoked, was always the centerpiece, supplemented by wild roots, tubers, and whatever game could be found. Hunting and trapping were as essential as herding, giving families crucial protein during the long, lean months. Historians still argue whether the Mongols' legendary strength and stamina sprang from their diet of high-protein, high-fat winter fare, or if it was simply the result of centuries of hard living in an unforgiving land. You pause as the hunters set a series of simple snares, loops of twisted hair or sinew baited with a piece of cheese or meat. The ingenuity is impressive. There's a quick lesson on recognizing animal tracks. Fox prints are narrow and direct, hair prints staggered and light. You commit each to memory, half wondering if you'll ever need to use this knowledge outside of these snowy plains. The day's hunt yields a couple of fat hares, a bundle of snow partridges, and, with much excitement, a small wild sheep. There are handshakes and laughter, a proud display of the catch, as everyone heads home. Once back inside the ger, the mood shifts to one of communal celebration. Children gather around, eager to help with the next step, turning today's bounty into tonight's meal. Here's a quirky tidbit. The first cut of meat always goes to the eldest or most respected person in the ger. Sometimes this is the shaman, sometimes the grandmother, whose stories keep the long nights bearable. There's an elaborate etiquette to dividing the spoils. Certain organs and cuts are reserved for honoured guests, and it's considered very bad form to refuse anything offered. You find yourself handed a skewer of grilled heart, charred on the outside, tender within. It's surprisingly delicious, and you smile your thanks, earning nods of approval. Cooking on the steppe is part performance, part practicality. A cast iron pot, battered from years of use, hangs over the fire. Into it goes the fresh meat, chunks of fat, a few withered carrots, and whatever dried herbs survived the autumn. Broth is ladled out to every hand, sipped with slurping gusto. The flavour is rich, almost buttery, a testament to the fact that, with the right hunger and company, even the simplest meal tastes grand. Occasionally, a special treat appears, cheese aged in leather bags, so sharp it wakes you up better than coffee, or a slab of white food saved from summer's bounty, clotted cream, soft curds, and dried yogurt. There are endless jokes about who can eat the most arrel without cracking a tooth. You attempt the challenge and nearly break a molar, much to everyone's delight. As you eat, stories are traded. One uncle boasts of trapping a lynx with only a loop of string and sheer willpower. Another claims he once shared a meal with a golden eagle, though it did most of the eating. There's laughter, teasing, and a sense that every winter meal is a celebration of not just survival, but the endless inventiveness of people who refuse to be defeated by snow, wind, or hunger. Historians still argue whether Mongol winter cuisine was born out of scarcity or a deep-seated appreciation for the land's gifts. Was it desperation, or was it tradition, a ritual honouring every animal and plant that gave its life for the family? As you watch the children lick the last of the broth from their bowls, you suspect it's both. Every meal here is a link in a chain stretching back through generations, each bite a small, stubborn victory over the season. When the meal is done, the bones are gathered for soup, nothing wasted. You lean back, full and content, watching as the last embers of the fire flicker in the shadows. On the steppe, every successful hunt, every shared feast is a reminder that winter may be harsh, but you are never facing it alone. Even after you've lived through a few blizzards and gnawed your way through enough dried mutton to last a lifetime, there's still a kind of thrill, mixed with a pinch of dread whenever you hear the elders speak of how Genghis Khan himself dealt with the cold. On nights when the wind screeches and the fire seems determined to go out, someone will inevitably start a story with, "Back when Genghis rode through winters colder than this." You gather around, elbows propped on knees, a mug of salty tea cradled in your hands. The fire snaps and pops, a chorus for tonight's tale. The elders describe Genghis Khan as a man forged by winter, born in a time of famine, raised under skies that didn't know the meaning of mercy. His legend is inextricably tied to the steppe's brutality, and you realize the Mongol way of braving the cold is as much about myth as it is about mittens. A mainstream historical fact: Genghis Khan, born Temujin, grew up in hardship, abandoned with his mother and siblings by their own clan. Food was scarce, winter was an adversary, the family survived on wild roots, whatever scraps they could hunt, and the unwavering will that Temujin would later demand from his followers. Historians still argue whether the severity of his early life shaped his ruthless strategies, or if it simply taught him to value loyalty and adaptability above all else. But for every grim truth, there's a quirky tale to lighten the mood. One popular legend has young Temujin learning to find his way home in blizzards by listening to the wind. He'd claim to hear it whisper secrets about the safest paths and hidden dangers. There are stories of him daring his brothers to swim in icy rivers in spring, just to see who could last the longest. Spoiler, it was never Temujin, but he always made up a better story afterward. You quickly realize that, for the Mongols, the line between survival skill and tall tale is about as thin as a frozen river. Sometimes the stories verge on the fantastic. There's talk of Khan's miraculous winter marches, when his armies would cover impossible distances through blinding snow, horses unshod so their hooves wouldn't slip, warriors swaddled in felt and singing songs to keep frostbite at bay. Some say Genghis consulted his shamans before every major winter campaign, seeking omens in the ice and the flight of birds. Whether or not he believed in magic, he knew the value of morale. A clever speech could warm an army faster than any campfire. You sip your tea, letting the stories wash over you, and can't help but imagine what it would feel like to ride with Genghis on a snowy morning. Would you freeze, or would the sheer audacity of the man keep you moving, step after punishing step? One elder laughs and says, "If you could keep up with his pace, you'd have earned your deal twice over." There's a peculiar detail passed down through the ages. It's said that Genghis always kept a special fur-lined cloak, made from the pelts of wolves and foxes, gifts from allied tribes, symbols of cunning and strength. He would wear it only on the coldest nights or when facing particularly stubborn foes. Whether this is fact or fancy, you can't help but wish you had a cloak like that on the chilliest evenings, if only for the psychological edge. Historians still argue whether the Great Khan's winter tactics were revolutionary or simply a reflection of the tough, adaptive mindset ingrained in every Mongol from childhood. Some credit him with introducing strategic cold weather raids and innovative supply lines. Others believe he just knew how to choose followers who could endure anything the steppe threw at them. After the stories, you help stoke the fire, adjusting the kettle so it doesn't boil over. The elders joke that even Genghis had to watch his tea lest it freeze mid-pour. There's a sense of camaraderie in these small acts. Shared laughter, shared legends, shared survival. You fall asleep that night feeling a curious comfort. If Genghis Khan could not only survive, but conquer winters that would drive most people to madness, maybe you're not doing so badly yourself. Wrapped in furs, listening to the wind dance around the Jur, you drift off dreaming of horses, wolves, and the sort of stubbornness that builds empires from snow. When you wake to a sky the colour of hammered tin, and a wind that slices straight through your layers, you know you're not the only one bracing for another brutal day. But today isn't about hunkering down at home. Today you join a memory older than the empire itself, winter on campaign. It's one thing to survive the cold in your Jur, with family and fire close by. It's entirely different to ride out with the Mongol army, where survival means movement, grit, and never letting your guard down. The camp stirs long before dawn. Warriors wrap themselves in layers of felt, leather and fur, hands moving briskly to cinch armor, knot belts and stuff boots with scraps of wool. Horses stand ready, steam rising from their flanks. There's no time for comfort. The cold is just another enemy, and the only victory comes from ignoring it. A mainstream historical fact: the Mongol army was famed not just for its speed and mobility, but for its resilience in the worst climates on Earth. Their ability to travel vast distances, even through the dead of winter, stunned their enemies and allowed them to launch surprise attacks where no sane opponent would dare pursue them. Historians still argue whether this winter hardiness was an innovation of Genghis Khan or simply the inheritance of generations raised on the steppe. Either way, the result was a force that could appear out of the snow and vanish just as quickly, leaving bewildered foes in their wake. You ride out with the vanguard, cold biting at your cheeks and nostrils stinging. The world is a blur of white and grey sky, land and snow merging together, depth and distance hard to judge. The only certainty is the warmth of your horse and the steady rhythm of hoofbeats. Every rider knows the tricks. Keep moving, breathe through your nose, and eat small, frequent bites of dried meat stashed inside your deal. You do your best to keep up, cheeks numb, hands stinging with each gust of wind. There's a quirky tidbit about Mongol winter marches. Soldiers often carried small bags of dried curds, tallow, and even horseblood, which could be mixed with snow for an instant meal. Some also tucked hot stones inside their coats, warming them by the campfire before dawn and clutching them for hours as they rode. You quickly come to appreciate the strange comfort of a half-warm stone against your ribs, a fleeting luxury on an endless frozen plain. The days blur together, waking before light, mounting up, breaking camp with practiced speed. The tents are packed, the fires doused, and the entire army moves as a single living organism across the ice. At night, everyone clusters together, horses staked in a wide ring for protection, and the warriors share stories or quietly repair gear by firelight. You listen as veterans debate whose boots are the least holy, and whose flask of kumis is still miraculously unfrozen. Historians still argue whether Mongol discipline was forged more by the demands of war or by the merciless steppe itself. Some claim the cold made everyone more efficient, less likely to complain, and quick to spot anyone slacking. Others insist that only a people already hardened by winter could ever hope to create an army like this. One where success or disaster could hinge on a single lost mitten or an unpatched saddle. One night, after a day's ride that left your teeth chattering, you find yourself sharing a bowl of steaming broth with a grizzled officer. He tells you how, In the worst winters, the army relied on wolf tactics, spreading out in small bands to hunt for food, then regrouping suddenly for an attack. Never stay still too long, he says, or the cold will finish you before the enemy does. You nod, understanding why every pause is brief, every campfire small and carefully shielded from the wind. There's camaraderie here, born not just from shared danger, but from the knowledge that you all face the same endless winter. The songs sung at night are half lullaby, half battle hymn, voices rising in harmony, warming the air even as the stars glint cruel and distant above. The campaign grinds on, supplies run low, tempers flare and fade, and frostbite becomes an ever-present threat. Still, no one gives in. There's too much at stake: honor, victory, and above all, the need to get home alive. You begin to see why Mongol armies inspired awe and terror across continents, why even the harshest winter couldn't keep them from their goals. As dawn finally breaks and the order comes to turn for home, you realize your returning changed. You've survived the cold, the hunger, and the relentless demands of winter on campaign. And though you're exhausted, you feel a quiet pride, one more chapter in the endless story of Mongol resilience. You might think winter would put a stop to trade, travel, and business on the Mongol steppe, but nothing could be further from the truth. As you wake to another still cold morning, the camp is buzzing with talk of a caravan, merchants and traders braving the snow, wind, and the occasional wolf to keep the arteries of commerce flowing. The Silk Road does not sleep, not even in January, and neither do the Mongols, who patrol and profit from its routes. You set out with the group, your deal cinched tightly, a woolen scarf wound round your mouth and nose. The horizon is blurred by swirling drifts, but a line of dark shapes appears. Camels, horses, ox carts, bundled in their own versions of winter gear, carrying goods from distant cities you've only heard about in bedtime stories. The traders greet your party with a mixture of relief and wariness. Out here, friends and thieves can be hard to distinguish, and everyone knows the winter cold takes no sides. A mainstream historical fact: the Mongol Empire, at its peak, connected more of the world than any other power before it, forging a network of roads and safe passage treaties that made long-distance trade possible even in the harshest seasons. Their postal relay system, called the Yam, allowed riders to cover vast stretches of frozen wilderness, ensuring messages and merchants could move with astonishing speed. Historians still argue whether Mongol rule brought peace and prosperity to the trade routes out of a sense of enlightened governance, or simply because a few well-placed threats kept everyone in line. As you walk beside the caravan, merchants swap stories about frostbitten ears, runaway camels, and the time a blizzard nearly buried half the cargo. There's laughter in the telling, but you can feel the tension. Every mile of frozen ground is a gamble. The trade goods are precious: bolts of silk, barrels of oil, bricks of tea, and for the lucky, jars of honey or dried fruit. You learn that in winter, the value of salt goes up. Nothing preserves meat or heals frost-chapped skin quite like it. Someone hands you a dried persimmon, sweet and tough, and you chew thoughtfully, imagining the orchards it must have come from. There's a quirky tidbit among the traders: in especially brutal weather, it's not uncommon for rival groups to call a truce and camp together for warmth and safety.
No one profits if we freeze, a merchant jokes. You huddle close around the fire, sharing what warmth you can, and listen to snippets of every language under the sun: Persian, Chinese, Russian, Arabic, all bound together by the universal language of survival. The caravan's animals are a sight to behold. The camels move with plodding, unbothered grace, their thick fur rimed with frost. Mongol horses, smaller but hardier than you'd expect, stamp the ground, noses buried in snow to sniff out scraps of grass. Oxen plod patiently under mountains of trade goods. Someone shows you how to wrap a cloth around a camel's nostrils to keep the worst of the wind at bay, a trick learned somewhere on the long road from Sumak.
Historians still argue whether the Mongol grip on trade routes was mostly carrot or mostly stick. Were they pragmatic rulers providing security for a fee, or ruthless enforcers who made commerce a risky but potentially lucrative gamble? Some say it was the Mongols' winter resilience that made these journeys possible at all. Without safe passage, nothing would move between continents until the snow melted. The journey is slow, punctuated by frequent stops to check for lost wagons, tend to frost-nipped fingers, and trade rumours about road conditions further ahead. You help dig out a stuck cart, your hands numb but your spirits oddly high. There's camaraderie in adversity, and for a moment you feel like a veteran of the ancient Silk Road, part of the grand, risky dance of winter trade. At night, fires crackle in little clusters along the frozen plain. Someone passes a skin of strong liquor around, and the stories grow taller with every swig. A Persian merchant boasts of once bartering a single wool blanket for enough jade to buy a city. A Chinese trader claims his tea is so prized that even the wolves would rather drink it than chase sheep. You laugh, warmth blooming in your chest, and realize that these tales, half true, half wishful, are as important as the goods themselves. They bind the traders, give them courage, and sweeten the memory of every frost-bitten mile. By morning, the caravan breaks apart, each group heading off toward its own destination. You help pack up, exchanging handshakes and promises to meet again when the snow thaws. The road stretches ahead, and you know there will be other nights, other fires, and other stories told beneath the iron grip of winter. By now you've learned the rhythms of winter survival on the steppe. Eat when you can, laugh when you're able, and never, ever underestimate the value of a hot drink. Yet some challenges never quite lose their sting, like finding water when everything around you has turned to ice. The Mongols have 1,000 tricks up their sleeves, but none is more crucial in the cold months than coaxing a drink out of a landscape that seems determined to freeze every last drop. You start your morning with the familiar ritual, scraping frost from the inside of the jar windows, gathering up buckets, and heading out in search of something, anything, that isn't frozen solid. The herders in your camp are matter-of-fact about the process, hacking holes in the ice of the nearest stream with practiced swings, chipping at frozen animal troughs, and even catching snow in buckets to melt over the stove. You can drink the snow, someone tells you, but you'll spend all day shivering for every sip. Apparently, the calories it takes to melt snow in your belly are better saved for something warmer. A mainstream historical fact. On the steppe, water scarcity was a year-round concern. Winter just added a new twist, forcing Mongols to become masters of improvisation. In the depths of the cold, they relied on a mix of stored ice, snow melt, and the clever use of animal hides to haul and insulate water. Some families even built small ice houses, storing blocks carved from frozen rivers, covered with straw or dung, to slow the melt and keep a reserve until the spring. Historians still argue whether Mongol ingenuity in water storage and transport was borrowed from other nomadic neighbours, or the result of generations battling the cruelest elements on Earth. You join a group on their daily trek to the river, shouldering an axe and a battered metal bucket. The river, when you find it, is unrecognizable, a white, silent sheet. The herders pick a spot and start chopping, revealing black, glassy water beneath the ice. Someone dips a cup and offers you the first taste, icy, pure, and cold enough to make your teeth ache. There's a collective sigh of relief. Water in any form is cause for celebration out here. A quirky tidbit. It's said that the best water comes from the first thaw in spring, when the ice wakes up and becomes sweet. Until then, you make do with whatever you can break loose. You notice some families add a pinch of tea, or a handful of dried herbs to their water, partly for flavour, partly to ward off cold spirits. If you're very lucky, there might be a slice of dried fruit floating in your cup, a tiny luxury savoured like treasure. But it's not always so simple. There are mornings when the river ice is too thick, the snow too dry, or the wind too biting to bother venturing far. On those days, you join the elders in melting handfuls of snow over the stove, stirring constantly to keep it from scorching. The children take turns feeding the fire, watching the drips collect with an intensity that borders on reverence. It's a slow, finicky process, and someone always grumbles that snow tea just doesn't taste the same. Some say this constant challenge bred the famous Mongol hospitality. A good host always has a pot ready, a spare cup for any traveller who might appear out of the cold. Others claim it's just practical. If you go to the trouble of boiling water, you might as well share it. Sometimes in the coldest months, there's no fresh water to be found, and the family relies on reserves, a barrel half buried in snow, lined with hides, or a jug sealed with fat to keep out the worst of the cold. You help chip away the frozen top, lifting the lid with numb fingers. There's a ritual to it, almost sacred. Whoever uncovers the water gets the first sip, a tradition born of gratitude and a touch of superstition. Later, as you sit by the fire, cradling a cup of weak tea, you realize how much of winter life revolves around these small, hard-won comforts. Each sip is a reminder that survival isn't about bravado. It's about ingenuity, patience, and a community willing to do whatever it takes to melt a little warmth into the world. You might think that after so many freezing nights on the steppe, you've seen all the winter disasters possible. But tonight, as the wind shrieks outside and the stove hisses contentedly, you get a taste of the chaos that can erupt when everything that can go wrong. You're awakened by a jolt, a heavy thump, and then the unmistakable groan of felt and wood as the ger shudders. For a split second, you wonder if a particularly ambitious wolf has come calling, but it's worse. The ger is collapsing right in the middle of the night.
Panic is contagious.
One shout turns into a chorus of scrambling bodies, the furs flying, the dogs barking, and a chorus of creative curses from their older relatives. You fumble for your boots, heart racing, as the roof sags lower, snow sifting in through cracks. Outside, the wind is howling with a kind of glee, tossing the flaps and tugging at every loose edge. It's cold, bitter, gnawing cold, and in the space of a few moments, what was once a haven is now a tumble of timbers, wool, and groggy people. A mainstream historical fact. Even with centuries of experience, Mongol families still suffered the occasional ger disaster. Heavy snow, sudden squalls, or simple wear and tear could spell trouble, especially in the depths of winter. For nomads, disaster prep was as routine as boiling tea or tending the herds. Historians still argue whether the elaborate system of knots, ropes and pegs evolved out of engineering brilliance or sheer repeated necessity. Some say the Mongols had more words for fix it fast than for hello. You pitch in with everyone else, hands numb, as you work to prop up the lattice walls and clear snow from the roof. Children are ushered to a neighbour's ger, the dogs bundled in spare furs. One relative grabs the felt cover, yanking it back over the frame, while another fetches a spare pole from the sled outside. Your job is to hold the door steady against the wind. A surprisingly important task, since the door is both symbolic and practical, the threshold of warmth and safety. Here's a quirky tidbit. In some families, it's considered lucky if a ger collapses and is rebuilt on the same night, especially if the youngest member helps right the first pole. This superstition is treated with a mix of eye-rolling and genuine relief. Tonight, a toddler is pressed into service, given a little stick to help hammer a stake, and everyone cheers as the roof finally stands straight. The teamwork is remarkable. No one wastes breath on blame. The old ladies bark orders, the younger ones fetch rope and repair patches, and even the teenagers, normally so allergic to chores, snap into action. The Mongol secret to survival you realize is community. No one is left to fend for themselves, especially when the wind is howling and sleep is a lost cause.
Historians still argue whether these disaster drills built the famously close-knit bonds of steppe society, or were simply the only way to keep a family in one piece through decades of relentless winters. Some point to the elaborate ger etiquette, the rules for entering, leaving and maintaining a home, as evidence that for the Mongols survival was as much about cooperation as toughness.
Eventually, with the ger patched and the roof propped, you crowd back inside. Someone stokes the stove until it glows, and the family settles into a pile of blankets and laughter, swapping stories about the collapse of 85 and the time a sheep managed to chew through 3 guy ropes in a single night. There's pride in these tales, a kind of fierce resilience that comes from facing disaster and beating it back, one knot at a time, before you drift off again. The youngest child is paraded around the ger for good luck. The dogs are given a scrap of meat as a reward for not running away, and someone makes a final, half-hearted joke about sleeping with one eye open. The wind rattles the door, but inside it's warm and full of life. Another night, another small disaster conquered, and with any luck, not repeated for a while. By now, you've learned to drift into sleep with one ear cocked for trouble. Out here, even the gentlest lull can be broken by a sudden snap, bark or gust that means something's up. Tonight, it's a chorus of low, urgent growls from the dogs, followed by a chilling silence. In the dark, every sense sharpens, and you realize just how thin the walls between warmth and wilderness really are. You lie still for a moment, heartbeat echoing in your ears, then pull on your boots and step outside. The night is pitch black, the sky so clear it seems the stars might drop into your hands if you reach high enough. The snow glows faintly, and every shadow takes on a life of its own. You scan the perimeter of the camp and catch a flicker of movement, eyes reflecting in the firelight, low and close to the ground. Wolves! Wolves are a fact of life here, as much a part of winter as the wind and the endless hunger. Mongols both fear and respect them. Wolves are clever, patient, and utterly relentless. Some families lose a sheep or 2 each winter. Others tell stories of herders who faced down entire packs, armed with nothing but a lantern and a voice trained to shout above the storm. A mainstream historical fact. Steppe wolves have been both adversaries and drill models for Mongol herders for centuries. Wolves teach patience, strategy, and the importance of the group, the very qualities the Mongols value in themselves. In fact, Mongol tribal legends often trace their ancestry back to a blue wolf, making the animals both a symbol and a test. Historians still argue whether these stories were ancient myth, clever self-branding, or born from the everyday necessity of surviving side by side with predators. You walk the line of tethered horses, murmuring softly, feeling the tension in the air. The animals are spooked, but holding. Your companions gather, no shouting, no panic. Instead, a practiced routine. The herders grab sticks, rattle the bells tied to the sheep, and set a perimeter with extra lanterns and burning dung. The acrid smoke a signal that humans are awake and watching. There's a quirky tidbit you only learn in moments like this. Mongols sometimes hang strips of red cloth, or old boots from the fence posts, believing the colour and smell ward off prowlers. You're handed a bundle of rags and told to tie them up high, just in case.
It's for the spirits too. Someone jokes so they know we're not sleeping.
The wolves circle, but they don't press their luck tonight. Maybe they sense the humans are ready. Maybe the smell of dung and kerosene is just a bit too much. Or maybe the stories of legendary herders still echo in the night air. You breathe easier as the pack slinks away, silent as shadows, leaving only paw prints and a reminder of how closely your world brushes against theirs. Historians still argue whether the dance between human and wolf is a rivalry or a partnership. Some scholars see it as a contest for territory and meat, others as a grudging respect, After all, the Mongols admire the wolf's cunning, their stamina, and their sense of unity. A lone wolf dies, but the pack survives. It's a lesson woven into Mongol culture as much as any proverb or law. With the danger past, the herders share a few jokes, some ribbing about whose sheep look tastiest, a story about a wolf that outsmarted 3 men and still managed to steal a hat. You find yourself laughing too, the adrenaline fading, the cold settling back into your bones. It's a night like any other, and yet not. You realize, as you crawl back under your furs, that these brief encounters with wildness are part of what keep you alert, humble, and in some odd way. Before you drift off, you glance at the door, now firmly barred. Outside, the wind howls, but inside, the warmth is absolute, a reward for facing down another midnight test. The wolves will return, and so will you. It's a story as old as the steppe itself. Long after the wolves have faded into the darkness, and the embers of the stove glow softly, you settle back onto your sleeping mat, and listen as the ger fills with a different kind of warmth. The quiet murmur of voices, the melody of a lullaby, and the gentle laughter of a family sharing stories.
The wind outside may be merciless, but inside, words and music are another shield against the cold. A reminder that even in the bleakest winter, the mind can wander where the body cannot.
On nights like this, the Mongols lean hard into their greatest traditions, storytelling and song. Someone begins with a legend about a clever fox who outwits a greedy merchant. Another picks up the thread with a joke about a shaman who mixed up her spells and accidentally made the goats dance. The children are wide-eyed, their giggles filling the ger. For a moment, the wind and wolves seem to vanish. The world shrinks to the circle of light and laughter. A mainstream historical fact. Mongol society is rooted in oral tradition. Long before most could read or write, history, law, and culture were passed down in stories, poems, and epic songs, an inheritance as vital as fire or food. These tales preserved family lineages, explained the world's mysteries, and reminded everyone of the qualities most prized on the steppe: wit, courage, loyalty, and a sense of humour that could outlast the harshest winter. Historians still argue whether the epic tales of heroes like Geza and the secret histories of the Khans are pure invention or echo distant truths, embroidered and embellished with each retelling. Tonight's storytelling isn't all grand heroes and legendary beasts. There are memories of old winters, funny mishaps, like the year someone's boots froze to the floor and had to be chipped loose at dawn, and tales of romance begun and lost before the first snow melted. The jokes fly thick and fast, warming the air as much as any stove. There's a quirky tidbit. Some Mongol lullabies are purposely dull, the words as repetitive and sleepy as possible, designed to bore children into dreamland. You can almost hear the generations of tired parents in the soothing, monotonous refrain. The sheep are sleeping, the horses too, and so should you. The youngest child is handed a dombra, a small, 2-stringed instrument. She strums it shyly, and an elder sings an old song about lost travellers and welcoming fires. The tune is slow, a little melancholy, the kind of song that slips into your bones and makes you miss places you've never been. Someone else begins a throat-singing melody, the low, buzzing drone vibrating through the ger like distant thunder. It's both haunting and strangely comforting, the kind of sound that can only be born from wide open spaces and endless nights. Historians still argue whether the steppe's music is descended from ancient Turkic chants, or if it was shaped uniquely by the wind, the gallop of horses, and the rhythms of migration. Some claim the Mongol lullabies contain coded instructions: how to ride, how to endure, how to stay hopeful when hope is thin. Others just enjoy the music for what it is, a soft blanket of sound in a hard-edged world. Before long, eyelids grow heavy, The stories wind down, the jokes grow quieter, and the songs take on a dreamy, hypnotic pace. The ger becomes a cocoon of memory and music, every person folded in with care. You feel the pull of sleep, but you fight it a moment longer, wanting to remember the sound of voices, the feel of a hand squeezing yours in the dark, the gentle hush as the last note fades. As you finally drift off, you understand why the Mongols say the longest winter is made shorter with words, and that even the bleakest night is softer when shared with song. In a world where the cold is always waiting, stories are the truest warmth you have. By now you've measured winter not by weeks or months, but by small, hard-earned victories. The day your boots didn't freeze overnight, the time you managed to keep the fire burning until dawn, the laughter shared after surviving a surprise collapse, or a near miss with wolves. Then, one morning, almost without warning, you notice something has changed. The air is a bit less sharp, the wind feels almost playful, and the snow, instead of biting, melts under your fingers. Spring is making its slow, muddy return. No one announces the end of winter on the steppe. It just seeps in as gentle as it is relentless. The herders rise a little earlier, smiles hidden in the corners of their mouths. You hear it in the animals first. Horses, sheep, and goats that once clustered tightly for warmth now wander wider, eager for the first tufts of new grass poking through the retreating drifts. Even the dogs seem giddier, tails wagging, as they splash through puddles of meltwater. A mainstream historical fact, spring's arrival is always cause for celebration among the Mongol. After months of surviving on stored food, dried meat, and the stubborn hope that there would be enough fuel to last, the promise of fresh grass, and with it milk, meat, and even the rare wild herb, signals renewal. The nomads have always marked this season with special rituals, feasts and games, their resilience tested and reaffirmed by every winter survived. Historians still argue whether the legendary Mongol optimism is nature or nurture, but few dispute that making it to spring is the truest cause for joy on the steppe. The change is everywhere. You join your hosts in cleaning out the ger, sweeping out the last of the ashes, and patching up the felt. Old threadbare clothes are aired out, boots scrubbed and tools sharpened in anticipation of a new season's work. Children splash each other with water, muddying up the once pristine snowmelt, earning stern looks and hidden smiles from their parents. The mood is lighter, every gesture a bit more hopeful. There's a quirky tidbit in the transition. Mongols believe the first thunderclap of spring chases away the winter spirits. Some families mark the moment by shouting back at the thunder, banging pots, or singing the oldest songs they know. It's a blend of superstition and celebration, anything to make sure the cold knows it isn't welcome anymore. Meals shift from the relentless sameness of dried cheese and meat to fresher fare. The first green shoots are harvested with reverence, turned into soups and salads. Milk from newly grazing animals is thinner, sweeter, a taste that everyone savours like a rare treat. Someone brings in a handful of wild garlic, and the whole jar fills with its sharp, life-affirming scent. You realise just how deeply the winter diet made you crave the simple, spicy bite of something green. Historians still argue whether these spring rituals are ancient remnants of shamanic practice, or just the natural expression of relief at having survived. Maybe both. You watch as the family gathers for a modest feast, bowls filled with the season's first treats, and feel the weight of winter lifting from every shoulder. It's not all idyllic, though. Spring is muddy, chaotic, and more than a little bit frustrating. The snow melts in fits and starts, turning paths into rivers and the campsites into a patchwork of slush and grit. Boots get stuck, carts bog down, and even the hardiest horses lose patience in the muck. But no one really complains. After what you've all endured, a little mud feels like a small price for another year of life. You end the day sitting on a patch of soggy ground, sun on your face, listening to the laughter and the low hum of animals, content with the change. There's relief, yes, but also a quiet pride, a sense that you've learned not just to survive, but to welcome and celebrate the return of life, however messy it might be. As night falls, you notice the stars seem brighter, the air softer, and the promise of another season stretching ahead. Winter will return, but for now you savour the gentle thaw, the fresh grass, and the shared knowledge that, once again, you made it through. Spring's arrival brings its own routines and challenges, but as you settle into this new rhythm, you catch yourself reflecting on what winter truly taught you. Every scraped knuckle, frozen toe, and midnight scramble becomes a lesson, retold in the lazy sunlight now pooling through the open flap of the jar. The family gathers over tea, recounting stories from the long, cold months with the easy laughter of survivors, knowing, in that subtle, unspoken way, that these hardships have stitched you together. You remember your first night, blinking back sleep and disbelief, as the wind rattled the walls. You'd worried you wouldn't make it until morning, convinced you were softer than a summer lamb, but somewhere between those endless cups of salty milk tea and the camaraderie of fixing a collapsed jar, you toughened up, not in the heroic cinematic way, but through small, stubborn acts, pulling on frozen boots before dawn, learning to share warmth, and even laughing at your own clumsy mistakes. A mainstream historical fact: Mongol resilience isn't an accident. Centuries of nomadic life shaped a culture where endurance is celebrated, not just endured. From the youngest child learning to patch felt, to the elders who recall winters when the snow was higher and the wolves bolder, every generation passes down tricks, jokes, and cautionary tales. Historians still argue whether this steppe toughness is genetic, cultural, or simply the product of endless adaptation. You suspect it's all three, tightly interwoven, reinforced by necessity and pride. There's a quirky tidbit you overhear one evening. When someone survives a particularly harsh winter, neighbours will tease them by saying they're now as tough as a yak's backside. It's meant as a compliment, the highest praise among people who know that softness has no place in the coldest months.
You accept the joke with a grin, secretly delighted to be counted among the winter-hardened, if only in jest. Spring also brings an avalanche of jokes. Mongols are masters of humour, dry, playful, and sometimes sharp as a wolf's tooth. There's laughter about whose deal split open in the wind, who fell face first into a snowdrift, and who was caught singing lullabies to the sheep. These stories, half truth and half exaggeration, become the glue that holds the community together. Every retelling sands down the sharp edges of memory, turning misery into legend and suffering into a shared badge of honour. You notice too how spring is a time for repairs, not just to the gear or the tools, but to spirits and relationships frayed by winter's claustrophobic months. Arguments smoothed over with a mug of hot tea, stubborn silences broken by shared work. Children run wild in the new grass, their shrieks echoing with relief and pent-up energy. The adults are slower to let go of their caution, eyes still tracking the sky for signs of a late snow. But even they relax in the gentler sun. Historians still argue whether this period of reflection, this weaving of lessons and laughter, is unique to Mongol culture, or if every community forged by hardship emerges with similar rituals. Whatever the case, you can't help but feel changed. The steppes trials have pressed you into a new shape, a little harder, yes, but also more open to moments of warmth and grace. One day, as you help repair the winter-worn fence, an elder sidles up and quietly hands you a strip of leather, your own lucky patch to sew into your deal.
Now you're ready for next winter, he says, winking. You tuck it away, proud and humbled, understanding, at last, that surviving here is never a solo accomplishment. It's the work of many hands, laughter in the darkness, and lessons shared over steaming bowls of broth.
As the days lengthen and the grass grows high, you find yourself looking forward less afraid of what the next winter might bring, and more certain that, with a little stubbornness and a lot of community, you'll be ready for whatever the steppe throws your way. With the last traces of snow vanishing and the camp bustling with spring chores, you start to pay attention to the subtle unwritten rules that have governed life all winter, especially when it comes to complaints. You realize quickly that, for all their jokes about frostbitten toes and frozen tea, the Mongols don't actually grumble much. There's a certain pride in not giving the cold the satisfaction of hearing you whine. If you do catch someone muttering about the weather, it's almost always couched in humour or masked by a tall tale. One evening, you sit with a few elders as they mend saddles and recount the coldest nights they can remember.
That was the year even the wolves wore hats, someone declares, and everyone laughs. The sound bright and undiminished by memory.
The conversation drifts to the subject of complaints, and you learn that the rare grumble is often a signal, not just of discomfort, but of something truly amiss. If someone voices concern, the camp listens. Otherwise, the attitude is to simply get on with it, as generations before have done. A mainstream historical fact, Mongol culture prizes stoicism, both out of necessity and tradition. Open complaints about hardship are seen as wasted breath, or worse, bad luck, inviting more trouble. Instead, hardships are transformed into stories, songs, or practical jokes, blunting their sting. Historians still argue whether this collective tough-it-out mentality was shaped more by the endless wind or by the community's need for resilience and unity. Either way, it's as much a survival tool as felt boots or yak dung fires. Of course, there are limits. If an elder says it's colder than a snake's belly in a snowdrift, the whole family knows to double-check the firewood and huddle closer. You learn that coded complaints, metaphors, proverbs, or exaggerated jokes are the Mongol way of airing grievances without losing face. Someone tells you, if you must complain, make it rhyme, and make it funny. A younger herder adds, the only thing we curse more than the wind is the sheep that wanders off in a blizzard. Everyone nods, smiling with the knowledge that a little griping, delivered the right way, can be good for morale. As a quirky tidbit, some families actually hold a grumble night at the end of winter, a semi-serious festival where everyone is allowed to moan about the hardships they endured, cold toes, spilled tea, lost mittens, or the dog that snored too loud. Complaints are shared, laughed over, and at the end ceremonially thrown out with a handful of ashes or a burst of song. The tradition keeps resentment from festering, turns suffering into humour, and draws the community even closer as spring begins. You reflect on your own moments of weakness, the mornings you wanted to curse the wind, the nights you fantasized about hot baths and thick carpets, yet each time you voiced frustration, you were met with a story, a gentle tease, or a task to distract you. Complaints here aren't ignored, just transformed, shaped into something more useful than self-pity. Historians still argue whether the Mongols' ability to endure, adapt and laugh through hardship is what made them so formidable on the battlefield, yes, but also in the kitchen, the camp, and the endless long nights of winter. Some say it's the defining trait of steppe people, a refusal to let discomfort erode their spirit, a stubborn commitment to making hardship just another story to share when the thaw finally comes. As twilight falls, you sit outside, wrapped in your patched deal, and watch the children race across the muddy grass. The elders swap tales, the dogs bark, and the camp hums with the business of survival made almost effortless by habit. You find yourself smiling, the urge to complain gone, replaced by the deep, steady satisfaction of having endured and the knowledge that you've earned a place in the long, unbroken line of steppe survivors. You wake one morning to a rare hush, The wind has finally fallen silent. The air smells faintly of earth instead of snow, and the sun shines with a new golden confidence. For a moment it feels as if the steppe itself is holding its breath, suspended between seasons. The long winter is finally truly ending. The last chill lingers in the shadows, but you can feel it loosening its grip, letting the land and its people exhale at last. There's a gentle bustle as the camp shakes off the remnants of cold. Boots are set outside to dry, saddles aired out, and furs beaten clean of months of ash and smoke. The children laugh, their voices brighter in the warmer air, and you catch yourself smiling at the simple, familiar routines, each one an act of hope for the new season. The herders share stories of lost mittens found under drifts, or the time someone's hat was rescued from a snowbank by a goat with surprising taste. No one rushes. There's a deliberate, grateful slowness to everything, as if everyone wants to savour this, the last true chill. A mainstream historical fact. For centuries, Mongol families have marked the end of winter with small acts of gratitude. It might be a meal cooked over the first fire built outside the jar, or a gathering at the river to toss in a handful of last year's dried herbs, a way of saying goodbye to the typically old cold and welcoming in the unpredictable, muddy adventure of spring. Historians still argue whether these customs are inherited from ancient shamanic rites, or simply the collective sigh of relief after surviving another year. Either way, the rituals are cherished, passed down with a mix of pride and gentle humour. You join your hosts for a quiet walk along the thawing river. The ice cracks and shifts beneath your boots, water trickling in little streams that sing of the month ahead. Someone tosses the last chunk of ice into the current and grins. For luck, so next winter finds us just as stubborn. There's an unspoken understanding the cycle will repeat, the cold will return, but so will the community, the cleverness and the laughter. There's a quirky tidbit. Some families save a small lump of last winter's ice in a jar, kept in the back of the jar as a good luck charm. If anyone complains about the heat of summer, the lid is opened for a moment so they can remember the sting of January and just maybe keep their grumbling in perspective. The day stretches, soft and bright. The chores are lighter now, patching fences, fixing gear, and planning the first journey to greener pastures. The mood in camp is buoyant. Even the animals seem lighter, their steps quickened by new grass and the promise of easier days. For the first time in months you can sit outside without shivering, sharing tea and jokes, without glancing nervously at the horizon for the next storm. Historians still argue whether it's these quiet transitional days, the in-between moments that truly define life on the steppe. Maybe the Mongols' greatest strength isn't simply enduring winter or celebrating spring, but in the way they mark the turning of seasons with gratitude, humour, and fierce togetherness. As dusk settles, the camp gathers for one last meal cooked over open flames, the night air full of laughter and plans. You look around and realise how much you've changed. The cold no longer feels like a threat, but a test you passed, a story you'll carry with you forever. You're a little tougher, a little wiser, and a lot more appreciative of both the warmth and the chill. The last icy breath of winter drifts away as stars bloom overhead. The steppe, once again, belongs to the living. Now the night is truly quiet and the final embers in the stove burn low. You sink back onto your sleeping mat, every muscle heavy with contentment, every worry softened by the gentle hush outside. The hard lines of winter have faded into memory. In their place is a softness, a sense of accomplishment and peace that you carry deep in your bones. The jar is still only the rhythmic breathing of those around you, and the distant snort of a horse remind you that you're not alone. You trace the curve of the ceiling with your eyes, feeling the warmth linger in the thick felt walls. The cold is just a rumour now, a faint echo at the edge of your senses. With every slow breath, You feel your body relax, the fatigue of months spent fighting the wind and snow finally giving way to rest. You let your thoughts wander across the plains, over frozen rivers, back to the laughter by the stove, and the music that floated through the long dark nights. Each memory settles over you like another blanket. A story half remembered, a joke whispered in the dark, the steady, stubborn rhythm of life on the steppe. Outside the world sleeps. Wrapped in the first fragile greenery of spring, you drift gently into dreams, soothed by the certainty that you have not only survived, but truly lived these long, cold nights. Your journey has become part of the endless story of the Mongol winter, one of resilience, camaraderie, and a quiet, hard-won joy. Rest easy now, the hardest nights are behind you. Let the silence wrap you up. Let your heart slow, and let yourself be carried, softly and slowly, into sleep.